Hi, I'm Pam, and I'm here to talk about video games. Of course, Max leaves exactly when I start. But today, we're talking about Metroid Dread. I honestly wasn't planning to review this game, but a lot of people have asked me to make a video. I did not record my whole playthrough because I wasn't planning to make a video, but I did get a bunch of little Switch clips, which I'll put in at random times. They may or may not be related to what I'm talking about. Also, this is just sort of a chatty kind of review. I've written down some bullet points, but I don't have a script that I'm going off for this. In terms of spoilers, just because it is a very new game, I'm not going to be talking about the story of this game basically at all, because it's not something I care about. I will be talking and possibly showing late game abilities and boss fights though, so if you don't want to see that stuff, then you might want to skip this video. And also, just to start off, the only Metroid game I've previously played is Super Metroid, which I reviewed. It's a very good game, though it could have been a little better. And it's really my only basis of comparison for the series and sort of what set my expectation going into this one. So just starting out with some first impressions I had of the game. When I started it up and for the first hour or so, I really didn't like it at all. It starts with a big long cutscene, which as I mentioned, I don't really care about. The last thing I knew about the story of Metroid was that Samus killed Mother Brain and got saved by a Metroid, and that was it. So I didn't really know who any of the characters were or what was happening, and again, I don't really play these kinds of games for the story. I like them for the action and the platforming and the combat. But the big thing, well, two big things that I really didn't like from the start were the amount of cutscenes and like little tiny cinematics. You can't skip any of these until you've already seen them once, and with the little tiny ones, you can't skip them at all. There just seemed to be an abundance of like Samus walking through a door and then looking around the next room, and it's like you're kind of ruining the flow of the game here, and that happened a lot. People did tell me that stopped, and that's not necessarily true. The cutscenes and sort of parts where you can't physically control the game do taper off towards the middle, but there's still a bunch of them there. Again, just like those little tiny, like snatching control away from you for a few seconds things, which I didn't really think fit the game and I found frustrating. And the other thing was just the atmosphere and the visual style of the game. I think graphically, it's proficient, like the graphics are good, but the art style is just very like sterile and soulless feeling. I expect from Metroid that I'm going to feel very like isolated, a little bit uncomfortable, like everything's really alien and dangerous to me. And I really didn't feel that at all from this game. It just felt like a sort of, again, just like this clean, sterile space station type atmosphere that I didn't particularly care for. None of the areas looked all that different. There was one I liked later on that was sort of had some greenery and some dinosaur looking enemies, but I felt like I wasn't even in that one for very long. So I did find that just the atmosphere was kind of lacking for me, and the visuals, some of the bosses looked cool, but I never found them impressive, and they were all just rather soulless. However, when it comes to this genre, it is one where I tend to like things more as the game goes on. As you're getting new abilities and learning new things, they do tend to get better, and that is the case here. I did definitely start liking the game more, although it was still overall quite hit or miss for me. One of the hits is the controls. Samus is just like beautiful to control. She's very fast and agile and fluid, and just like her running and jumping and shooting, it all feels very nice. There are some cases, like with the grapple beam, where it feels like you're just pushing almost every single button on the controller at once, which sometimes felt like, you know, a little bit too much and felt like my hands started to get sore. Also, I am a super missile kind of girl rather than a charge shot kind of girl, so I felt like I was constantly holding down right bumper, and it might have been nicer to just be able to toggle it on and off rather than just hold it down for almost the entire game. But aside from those things, the controls did work very nice, and Samus just has a very fluid, smooth movement that made it fun to run around. One thing I would have liked to see though is to be able to use the D-pad to control Samus. I really prefer the D-pad for controlling any kind of 2D action platformers, and that was just not available here. And what made it worse is that the D-pad wasn't really used for anything else. Late in the game, like pressing right on it is used for one ability, but that seems like very little in order to take that method of control away from the player completely. For the most part, I really loved all of the abilities in the game. Most of them were from Super Metroid, like the space jump, the screw attack. Those all felt really nice to use. Not all of them got as much use as they could have. Like, I found the grapple beam in particular, there's a little section of the map where you use it and then it kind of gets forgotten a little bit. There's one ability, I think it's called the flash shift, which is like a dash, which I believe is new to the series, and that was fantastic. That made going through, especially boss fights or some of the tougher sub-boss fights, made them like really nice and quick, and that was one of the best additions, I think, in terms of abilities. However, there's also an ability that's basically a stealth where Samus just goes invisible, which can be used for something I'll talk about in a bit, or to open doors that have like motion detectors to sort of hide from them. This ability worked much less for me. Stealth was not something I ever wanted to have to do in a Metroid game or any Metroidvania game at all, so that one worked a little less well for me. At the beginning, the abilities are coming at a fairly decent pace, and you're getting to sort of use them and learn them as they go. Usually they'll be incorporated into the boss fights you come across in a really neat way. Near the end of the game though, like maybe the last third to a quarter, the pace really ramps up and you just start getting ability after ability after ability, like back to back. You get I think a cross bomb attack, and then maybe 30 minutes of play later, I got the super bomb attack. And a lot of these abilities are sort of overriding each other, or once you get one, you really don't need to use the others. Also for the wave beam, it sort of overwrites your previous shots. And I did find at the end, it was almost a little too fast, like you were getting these abilities, but they weren't really making the most of using them because they were just introducing new ones so quickly afterwards. But in general, the movement and abilities are very fun to use, and it does make going through the map, to the extent that you're going to do it, pretty enjoyable to do. So when it comes to the map and level design, I have a bit of mixed feelings. The actual sort of in-menu map is kind of interesting. It does this thing where if you select a certain obstacle or door that's blocked, it'll highlight those on the rest of the map. So if you've just gotten an ability that will let you bypass that, then you can see other places where that takes place, where you can now get into new areas, which is pretty cool. But it also does weird things, like it keeps the items or missile upgrades and things like that you've already collected on the map, which just makes it a little bit confusing and harder to read and notice right away which things you haven't collected. But the biggest problem with the map for me was I felt like it disincentivized me from doing much backtracking or exploring. The map is segmented into, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 main areas, and you travel between them using teleportals, which are basically just really long load screens between each section. And it just makes it more complicated than I feel like it needs to be to backtrack and go to other areas. The paths are not always clear. Sometimes you're opening up a new path, like by pushing a block away or something, but then the block falls and blocks an old path from being available to you. So it just makes backtracking more difficult than I think it needs to be. And often I felt like there were only key points in the game where it was available for me to backtrack and explore. So I often found myself just not doing it at all. I think when I got to the end of the game, I had only collected 37% of the items, which really isn't very much for me. A lot of the times the power-ups didn't really make all that much of a difference. Most of the things you'll be finding are +2 to your missile capacity, along with the occasional energy tank, but I didn't really feel rewarded by collecting those things. Throughout the entire game, I never ran out of missiles a single time, because as you're fighting things and doing bosses, they're constantly dropping, so you don't really need them. And then when it comes to energy tanks, they can help out in the sort of general exploration, but bosses hit so hard that having an extra energy tank or two really didn't seem to make that much of a difference. And one other thing that happened to me a few times, mostly near the beginning of the game, is that the critical path was blocked off by destroyable blocks, which I just found very frustrating. I think hiding secrets behind destroyable blocks, that's a good thing, but there were a few times when I felt like I was just stuck and had nowhere to go, and the solution was always to just like randomly shoot all around me until something broke and I could move forward. So wasn't a big fan of that. But now let's talk about the boss fights, which are probably my favorite part of this entire game. They're quite challenging, they're multi-phase, you really need to learn the patterns in order to be successful, and they make use of a new sort of parry move which you can use, and a boss will do something that does a flash, and if you parry it, then you'll have a chance to really unload onto them and make them take a lot more damage. As well, they'll usually drop some health and extra missiles while this is happening. I thought that they were of a really good difficulty. It always starts out and like at the beginning of each phase, you're thinking like, oh my god, how am I ever going to do this? And then you try it a few more times and you're able to do it without taking any damage at all. And how long it takes to learn generally depends on how many phases there are, because each phase took a few times in order to learn that pattern. But once you really get it down, just like the quickness of the battles, the use of the parry, the use of that flash shift, make them just really engaging and exciting fights. There are also a whole bunch of sort of like mini bosses or sub bosses that you'll be fighting multiple times throughout the game, and I actually found a bunch of these more difficult, or at least they took me more attempts than the bosses. The big bosses, there's actually not that many of them, maybe like 6 or something, but the first few only took me maybe 4 or 5 attempts. The last 2 are the most difficult ones, and those took a little bit longer. But some of the sub-bosses could be very difficult, and again, you really needed to make use of that parry move in order to sort of like open up their weak spots so that you could kill them. I did find the bosses, again, felt a little out of place though, especially the first few. I'm just used to these bosses and these games in general just being like, you're right there, you're in control the whole time, but the bosses kind of reminded me of the first God of War game, how they have little sort of cinematics in the middle of them and basically quick time events, except there's not button prompts, there's just the flash to make you do the parry. But it does feel strange when you're in the middle of an exciting boss fight and then it pulls away and there's a cutscene of Samus running around and shooting things, or you do the parry and then you just have to like bash the missile button a bunch of times like you're just, you know, hitting A as fast as you can. It's not A though. So that was kind of weird. I did find those sort of lessened again as the boss fights went on, but it was just another sort of strange choice to just throw cinematics into the middle of boss fights. But if you take those away, again, I did find the boss fights themselves very exciting and of a good challenge. Of course, we have to talk about the part of this game where the dread comes in, and that is the EMMIs. These are these sort of Terminator-like machines which will come after you. Each level, each world, stage, whatever, has a section that these EMMIs are confined to. You'll know when you're going into one, and they'll basically be tracking you down, and you need to get away from them until you're able to find a weapon that will let you defeat them. Because until you have that weapon, you really can't hurt them. And I just thought these sucked. Like, they ruin the game. Like, every time I'm excited, I think I'm like, okay, I'm really getting into this game, I'm having a good time, oh, I just beat a difficult boss, I'm feeling really pumped. You go into a new area and there's another fucking EMMI, and it just like feels like hitting a wall in terms of enjoyment of the game. And this is the place where your new stealth ability tends to come in the most, and I just feel like I'm a woman in power armor, I have an arm cannon, I don't want to stealth, I am not made for stealthing. Let me fight things, let me jump around and screw attack and like do fun things. Stealthing around and trying not to be seen by these things and caught by these things, like, it did instill a sense of dread, not because it was scary or intense or intimidating, just because it was really annoying. When they catch you, you basically get a chance to sort of stun them and run away. I found this almost impossible to do. I had no problem with the parry moves during bosses, but with these EMMIs, I had a better chance to get away from them if I just looked away from the screen and randomly smacked my controller than when I was actually doing it. So maybe I just wasn't getting what I was supposed to do there. But regardless, it was just annoying. And again, there's cutscenes then, the little mini cutscenes when they catch you, and I would have rather them just insta-kill me and just get it over with than make me watch that stupid cutscene over and over and over again. So the EMMIs just function to make the entire game less fun, and once you finally got the weapon you need to defeat them, that's not even that interesting either. You defeat them all in the exact same way by holding buttons down for a long time and aiming at them, and it wasn't satisfying. It wasn't like, oh wow, I finally got this tough thing. It was just like, finally this thing is dead, I can actually explore this level a little bit. At one point during the game, the EMMIs stop being a concern, and I think that might have been the best part of the game for me, and I was having a lot of fun, and then they sort of get turned back on, and it goes back to just like constant frustration and being upset that these were included in the game at all. Though I will say the one good thing is that if they do catch you and kill you, you don't have to go all the way back to a save point. They just spawn you again outside of the EMMI area, so you can at least get back to trying to stealth around them quickly. Alright, just a few final observations about the game. The music, unfortunately, is quite forgettable. Occasionally they play the theme from Super Metroid, which really just drives home how bland the rest of the music is. I've barely even noticed it as I was playing the game. There's also, for some reason, almost zero settings in this game, like accessibility settings, anything. If you press select or whatever the button's called on a Switch controller, you can adjust the brightness, and that's it. You can't remap buttons, you can't change subtitle sizes, anything like that. Again, I did find there was too many cutscenes. You have a robot buddy named Adam who talks to you a bunch, and he says basically the same thing every time. You're not strong enough to kill the EMMIs, you're not strong enough to kill insert boss name here, do better, and it's really sort of irritating to talk to him. So my general thoughts on the game are, it's okay, it's hit and miss. There are parts of it that are really good, specifically the boss fights, but a lot of it wasn't that great for me. I found the exploration particularly disappointing, and the EMMIs I just thought were a bad addition to the game. It's just, I did have quite a lot of fun with a good portion of this game, but every time I was like really building up to liking it and having fun, I ran into something that just sort of lessened my enjoyment of the game entirely. So yeah, again, I do have kind of mixed thoughts on it. Great controls, Samus is fun to fight with, and a lot of abilities are a lot of fun. That dash is absolutely great, but just a lot of it that I didn't really like at all. So if I were to rank this on my big Metroidvania tier chart, I would give it a B if it weren't for the EMMIs, but the EMMIs are going to take it down to a C because they just really felt like a waste of my time. And I also just wanted to chat a bit about the cost of the game. And originally I wasn't going to pick this up on day one, I was going to wait. And then I thought to myself, well, this is a first-party Nintendo game. It's never getting cheaper, so you may as well just go and get it now. And it made me think about the price of the game. So it's a full price game, and I've often thought to myself, like, what would a full price Metroidvania be like, and how I would really like that. And I'm not sure what makes this full price. I mean, other than it being Nintendo and Super Metroid and knowing that people will pay for it, but it doesn't seem more worth $60, or for me in Canada, $80 plus tax, which is $90, than a lot of other games I've played. In terms of length, my game was 8.5 hours long, technically, on my save file, though I definitely spent longer than that with it. I'm not one of the people who say, oh, a game has to be a certain length for it to be worth a certain amount of money. Games aren't worth my money only when they're bad, so I don't particularly have a problem with the price, but it just got me to thinking, like, for $80, I could have bought Hollow Knight and Blasphemous and Ori and the Blind Forest at their day one prices. I could have got Blasphemous and Bloodstained at their day one prices, and I definitely would have gotten a lot more enjoyment out of either of those than just this single game. So yeah, it's just funny thinking about, like, what makes this a full price game. I don't think it is more polished or more fun than any of the games that I just mentioned. Of course, Hollow Knight should have been more than $15. That's just crazy. But yeah, just got me thinking about what makes a full price game, and in this case it's just brand name recognition more than anything else. So yeah, I guess that's all I have to say about Metroid Dread. I did finish it. I wanted to like it more than I ended up doing it. I doubt I will go back to it. As I said, the map layout was just sort of disorienting, and I don't really feel inclined to go back and try to 100% it or anything. The map is just too disjointed and convoluted for me to want to spend much more time in it. I'm glad I did beat it, and again, some really good boss fights, good controls, definitely has its good moments, but overall, just an okay game for me. That's all I have to say now. Let me know in the comments what you thought of Metroid Dread, or if you think I'm just a baddie who needs to get good. I'm sure there'll be some of those. But anyway, thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you next time. If you're interested in Metroidvanias and want to know some of my favorites and my personal rankings, check out my Ranking Metroidvania video. Or something else. I have a Patreon if you want to support the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.